Allora, certo. Ok. Ci siamo? Ok. Ok, allora si comincia. Buonasera a tutte le persone presenti, grazie di essere qui. Faccio solo un piccolo appunto iniziale per dire che l'incontro si svolgerà in inglese. Qualora aveste delle domande alla fine, insomma, negli ultimi minuti dedicati alle domande, potete fare tranquillamente in italiano, noi traduciamo poi per le due artiste. So, good evening, everybody. Hi. I would firstly like to thank the Museum Mao and its director, and of course Chiara and Federico, for giving birth to this program, this public program, Evolving Soundscapes, which proposes a series of events such as performances, concerts, and discussions and talks like this one we are doing tonight, which wisely investigates the contemporary Asian production and the contemporary Asian world in general. And this is something it's really necessary. So thank you for this. I am Ilaria, editor of the Asian collection of the publishing house Ad Editore, and I'm also an independent researcher in the field of art, especially in modern and contemporary Asian art. And tonight we will be talking with two amazing artists that are here with us, Micaela Tobin and Rieko Whitfield. Hi, good evening. And Micaela is a soprano, a sound artist, a performer, and a teacher based in Los Angeles with Filipino origins. And as a composer, she's known with under the name White Boy Scream. And in a way, she investigates voice, experimental sound, electronics, and contemporary opera. And Rieko Whitfield is a London-based artist, a Japanese-American artist, whose practice ranges from performance, moving image, installation, and music and text. And she's also one of the founding members of Diasporas Now, which is a performance platform which opens up contemporaneous debates and discussion on displaced identities and celebrates cross-diasporic solidarity. And we will talk about it later with Rieko. So both the artists explored their diasporic identities in their work using different languages. But before starting and going through questions, I would just briefly introduce what is actually diaspora and diaspora in the context of art and contemporary art, as it is a complex, multifaceted, and also wide concept, which in the last decade has gained expanding currency in cultural studies as a theoretical frame to describe not only communities that are dispersed through violence, but also communities, cultures, and individuals spread globally under the condition of late capitalism. And the range of subjects explored through the lens of diaspora suggests the potential for the term to bring diversity into political, social, and art historical discourses, while also challenging normalized categories of difference to which we have been accustomed, like resulting from the Eurocentric and Western approach which dominated history and interpretation of history, and which is always tending to unify and universalize a little bit this phenomenon. But how we will see tonight, diaspora is characterized by multiplicity, multiple practices, and multiple worldviews. And so this is something that I find really fascinating and also difficult to account for, is that diaspora is not only describes a community who share some kind of bond or experience, but it is also about people who choose to identify as diasporic in order to self-mobilize. So it can be also understood as a response to a given moment in time to political or economical development. So it does not stay constant over time. So this is also like something about identity, and we will be talking about identities tonight. Maybe I will start actually from this and asking you the first question. So the notion of identity, or having multiple identities, more than one identity, different parts that communicates each other. And I would like firstly to ask you, what was your path as an artist, and how did you came to the idea of exploring your identities and your history through arts and music?
Cool. Who do you want to go first?
Micaela, do you want to go first?
Okay, I'll go first. We'll do rock, paper, scissors for the rest of them. It's a great question. Also, thank you for having me as part of this program and creating space for these conversations and this work, especially in Europe and the UK. I think these conversations are incredibly important to have worldwide. I started off in classical opera, kind of a conservatory education, and then eventually I kind of started to feel alienated from that art form, from kind of this classical canon, and eventually realized like that I really had never seen my own identity or cultural identity or ancestral history reflected back to me on the stage. And that was a really big turning point for me. And I decided that I wanted to start, or that I had this deep urge to kind of dig in and excavate, you know, my history, my family history, kind of, you know, even longer periods of time, like going back to ancient history and trying to kind of reimagine a lot of these, you know, ancient mythologies in present day. And then, through that kind of realizing and rediscovering what a diasporic identity is, which is something kind of in this in-between place between all of these different, you know, cultures and places.
Cool. Yes. Should I go? Okay. That was good. Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having us both here. I think for me, I'd say the current strain of my practice and kind of like thinking around diaspora came from my time kind of during my MA when I was at the Royal College of Art, and I had just moved to London when I was living back in Japan. I was born in Japan, grew up in America, had this kind of like moment where I connected back to the country that I was from, and then moved pretty much straight to London to do this kind of like intense education in an arts institution. And I found kind of from day one, I found it was very stifling. Like it was all of the discourses and the texts we were reading like really only came from like one historical narrative. And that kind of somehow, I kind of chose to veer off that path and kind of do my own thing and pull from my own culture. Like also like there's the ties with mythology as well, because it's somehow tied to like a more spiritual realm, kind of tied to like also a reimagining of your own mythology when you're not properly one identity or another. There's this space to like mythologize your own creation story as well. So that's where I kind of drew inspiration. And then came around sometime during the lockdown and pandemics as well. I'd always kind of been classically trained in music, but then it was in that time that during my MA, having no access to anything, lockdown, really, really returned back to music. And it's just kind of been in that direction ever since. So it's kind of like a happy accident, but it was kind of meant to be. It feels that way. And that's how I am where I am now. And that's also where it was kind of the birthplace of both the Regenesis project that I've been working on for years and of Diasporas Now as well. So that's where it comes from.
And Okay, maybe as you mentioned it, Rieko, I would like to ask you if you can please tell us more about this project, Diasporas Now, and when did you found it, and what is actually the related responsibility to conceive a platform or a project like this with this strong and dense meaning?
Yeah, so the platform began while I was still at the Royal College of Art with two co-founders, Paula Estrella and Lulu Wang, and we kind of came together. It started off as a live streaming platform for performance artists, or what I call expanded performance, so kind of like performance art, but then reimagined how we can kind of expand that, the category of like what we would expect to see in a white cube gallery or whatever. So that includes music, it includes DJ sets, it includes, it's kind of a mix of different worlds as well, not just like strictly the art world. But yeah, we came up with this idea. It started as a live streaming platform. And then as the world opened back up to live events, there was just this like, people were hungry to be in that presence of live performance. So that we really kind of just started taking off from there. When we were conceiving the idea, like in the early stages of the platform, it was interesting because we kind of launched it while we were in, like an arts institution, and there was quite a bit of pushback against this idea of like, why are you creating a platform that only platforms people of color? Like, and I found that like surprising, that reaction, but then like not surprising at all. If you know what I mean. Like, I'm like, great, cool, amazing, love that for us. But then as we were, it's been something that's been, it's kind of like, it's a platform, it's a community, but it's also a strategy of working within institutions. So I kind of see the platform Diasporas Now, like obviously fun, sexy events that people love to come to. It's a party. It's always a celebration of identity, because we like to really push like identities. Like we want to break away from this like popularized narrative of kind of trauma, trauma extraction, and like marginalized identities as these kind of sad pity parties. Like that's what people want us to say, and that's what people want to hear, and that's what like. Anyways, so we were like, you know what, we're going to have a platform that celebrates difference and celebrates identity, and then use the platform as kind of a Trojan horse to get our foot in the door within institutions that we partner with, to then kind of do the administrative kind of work to bring in other voices. And so it's kind of worked as a strategy as well, whether it's art institutions or it's universities and things like that, just like creating a space
I love that.
for this to exist. So that's kind of where that's kind of how we came about.
Okay, so that's true that you say that like power structures that lead the art world, and not only the art world, have like certain expectation on how identity should be approached, right? Like they expect struggle and performance of pain just for the Western gaze, actually, rather than like an experiment or a celebration, as you said before, of the complex notion of identities. And maybe I will ask this question to Micaela too. So what do you think about it, and how do you deal with it? How do you relate with it in your work and also in your life?
Yeah, it's so great that you bring this up, Rieko, because it's something that I have also been talking about with my current collaborators. And we talk about, the need for joy in this work, in talking about, or kind of the process of healing, we could say intergenerational trauma, colonial trauma, all of these big kind of meta concepts that span, centuries, and we're trying to kind of, represent and honor them in the now, but how do we do that without bringing ourselves all the way down? And there has to be some sense of joy, release, hope, in the work itself. I think it's really important, because or else it becomes this kind of echo chamber of trauma that doesn't seem to go anywhere. And then who's profiting off of that? Again, we know who. Institutional power. And so I love that I think this is something in the air with all around the world with this type of work, and it's really inspiring and empowering. And I think it's important for younger artists to also be coming into that, and for this to be the narrative and the dialogue.
Yes, and also I think that to look at diaspora in a more cohesive way in terms of artistic production, it is something that is still missing maybe in the art discourse. So things maybe have improved now compared to years ago. There are more writings and projects, like for example Diasporas Now, but not just this one. And there are projects also on mobility. So there are many things that are going on. Let's think about maybe like Diaspora Pavilion that was in the Venice Biennale in 2017. So they try to present contemporary artists, challenging this notion of cultural boundary zone, belonging, language, homemaking, and of course, identity, right? So maybe something is moving, but there is still a lot of things to do, as you previously said. And I would like to ask you something about your work. And so you both are really deeply engaged in recovering and reconstructing the oral culture and ancient myth and ancient mythology, on which beliefs, ritual, festivity, and religion itself are usually based, right? So my impressions is that you kind of reconfigure it, the mythology, so as to be transnational, syncretic, plural, hybrid. You create a sort of new contemporary mythology, we could say, and maybe resulting from where you come from and where you are here, but where you are now, like where you grew up, where you work, where you live, and where you are heading to. So I would like to ask you, does it contribute for you to reshape a collective memory? And if so, how? And if you can also explain why you decided in your work and the two films that we will see tonight to use these ancient mythologies.
You first, Rieko.
Okay, well, that's a big question.
That's a big one.
I guess I just really believe in the power of storytelling and mythologies. The mythologies that we tell, or we choose to put attention on, is a huge part of how we make sense of the archetypes of who we are as people, as cultures. So I'm really interested, personally, my interest in looking at Shinto mythology or Japanese mythology. I also look at Buddhist mythology, is because it's so rarely drawn upon in kind of Western contemporary art, I guess. And then for my project specifically for Regenesis, I was drawn to two things: the creation myth with Izanami, where this goddess creates the world and with her brother, and then she burns to death in a purgatory forever, and reimagining this goddess then coming out of purgatory in a world long past the apocalypse, and kind of making sense of how this, from this perspective, from this deity, of how we could kind of come together as communities to heal the earth. And then that was one element. And the other element that I was inspired by was the tradition of no theater, which is, I'm not actually an opera singer. So when I use the term opera, it's kind of loosely based on no theater as one of the, I wish I could be, but no, but it's pulling from no theater as one of the oldest forms of opera in the broad sense. But what drew me to Noh theater was this magical ritual of these masks. And in Noh theater, it's actually not just performance, it's a spiritual ritual where it starts, the ritual and the performance begins backstage when the mask comes on in front of the mirror. And at that moment, you are channeling the spirit of the character through your body. And so that can you can embody a plant, you can embody an animal, you can embody a ghost, a human. And that to me was a really interesting way of imagining, taking a really animist perspective on, I don't know if we can extend empathy to more than human entities, then it's kind of a different approach to look at, you know, wider issues like, say, the climate crisis, right? It's a completely different perspective on looking at embodiment, and maybe that's a starting point, a different starting point and a different angle that we can approach these issues that are, you know, the largest issues of our times. So that's something, that's what I was thinking about through this project. I'm sure I didn't hit all the questions that you just asked in that previous question. That's okay. My answer.
It was perfect. It was perfect. It was perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, something that, Rieko, that you said that touches, I can really relate to in my work is this sense of ritual and using performance and using this kind of storytelling or the container of opera. And I love that this container of opera is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger and twisted and, you know, experimented upon. I think it's fabulous. But this idea of ritual, like performance as ritual, performance as this kind of internal excavation that, to me, the audience is kind of a byproduct, or the end product. You know, it's not about an end kind of product. Or even when I was making the film, so I'll back up, the film I made last year in 2021 now, I guess 2 years ago, Bakunawa, Opera of the Seven Moons, is based on a Filipino, this pre-colonial mythological figure, the Bakunawa, who is responsible for the first lunar eclipse, kind of tells that creation story. And to me, the myth kind of found me. I feel like I was surfing the internet and came upon an online archive of, you know, a bunch of different stories. I didn't even know. I was like, who wrote this? Like, where is this from? And it's kind of, no one, you know, all over the Philippines is the Bakunawa. There's different kinds of iterations of this story. And, you know, a lot of stories were obviously erased through the hundreds of years of colonization, but this story remained and really popped out at me. And I felt like immediately after reading it, I thought, like, I have to make this into an opera. And so I did. I made an album first, and then during the pandemic, I decided I had the opportunity to do something through Red Cat Los Angeles. And because we were in the pandemic still, I said, okay, let's make a film out of it. But that process, even the tedious process of making film, and I'm sure you can relate to this, there's just so many more elements than just, you know, a live performance. And it was my worry that in the making of the film, when I was performing, I was so all over the place that I wouldn't really feel the ritual of it, or I wouldn't be able to kind of be in it as much as I had in other performances, or, you know, in my live sets and stuff like that. But the subject matter was just so powerful. I remember one night we were filming on the beach, the final scene of the opera. I'm singing this song that was my grandparents' favorite song, because they were separated during the Vietnam War. My grandfather worked overseas and for almost a decade, and so they would write love letters back and forth to each other. And so this song, this old standard, Love Letters, was their favorite song, their love song. So to me, that was such a powerful kind of story in our family, and kind of in its way our own mythology, that I wanted to commemorate them and honor them by making that the finale of the film. So I'm, you know, super DIY guerrilla style. We go to the beach in the middle of the night, you know, we camped and went out at like 2 a.m. I climbed up these rocks and I was singing the song. It was a full moon. And I was singing this song out to the ocean. And in that moment, I felt, you know, oh, this is the ritual. This is what we're doing. And this is why making art is important, and kind of, you know, all of the through lines came together in that moment. And I think that's something that I'm always chasing when making work. And pre-colonial mythology in particular is, I think, important because we have the ability to add onto it, to transform it, to experiment and twist it and keep it alive, and keep you know, these things in conversation. And I think honoring pre-colonial or pre-contact culture is really important because it connects us to our history. It makes these, you know, really it makes our history alive still, and not just in the books. And I always say, like, you know, when I'm talking about ancestry or honoring the ancestors in my work, I'm also honoring the future ancestors, and I'm making this for future generations as well. And just through the film, you know, I've met so many other Filipinos in the diaspora, Filipinx artists that, you know, have said to me, I didn't know that, I've never seen, you know, Filipino art through this lens before. Like, I'm inspired, I'm gonna make something. And I'm always so excited. I'm like, I want to see 10 operas about Bakunawa, you know. I want to see, it's this delicate web of connection through us around the world, and not just in our own communities, like, you know, in the greater, the AAPI, the Asian diaspora. It's important, and to twist the Western gaze and challenge it. Yeah, I don't know if did I hit all the marks?
It's good. If Rieko, you want to add something to this, feel free. Otherwise, we can go on.
Yeah, we can continue.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's really interesting what you said, Micaela. Like kind of recreating these rituals to give something to the future generation of the future. So this is maybe what I was asking you, if you're doing like this kind of work, like recreating a sort of collective memory. So you just like using what you read, maybe what people told you about this ritual, this myth, and then you put inside your point of view and your world views. So you're like enriched now this mythology with your what you lived, what you saw in your life, and in related to your culture of origin and the place you are living now. So it's really interesting and way to this way in which you work. And I would like to ask you, as you both work with your voice, so the voice is really important, and I think that is like a kind of clear act, like take of position, because we frequently hear the expression to give voice to a people, a community, like it can be like a diasporic community, a queer community. One is that people in that community already have a voice. The problem is that it's not heard, it is not listened, and it is not understood, as it is filtered, as you said before, by the Western dominion and perspective also. So I would like to ask you about your choice of using voice and sound to describe and talk about this kind of topics, and how also do you use your body and your voice to cultivate new languages, new paradigms, and so on.
Yeah, with using my voice, it's like because I had this whole music background and I kind of walked away from it for a while. So actually coming back to making music publicly, and also it's kind of interesting because I worked the opposite way that Micaela did. So I made the film, kind of like really DIY, recorded the music, kind of figured it out, and then afterwards, now I finally re-recorded, like co-produced, mixing, putting out the album now. So this is like the first EP putting out. So it actually was this whole full circle moment coming back to the music. So it was actually really terrifying to perform for the first time since I was, in metal bands as a teenager, like, to be on stage, and after all these being so isolated in lockdowns, it was really actually, it took a lot of courage to put myself in that position, put my body in that position, in front of an audience, especially kind of coming out of a more, I wouldn't say traditional, but a bit more of a traditional look at institution, like doing an MA and coming out of the Royal College of Art and all of that. There's like what I was doing was quite weird. Like it was kind of more towards pop music, which is it's not like serious enough in some people's view, or like drawing from spirituality, or like, drawing from discourses that aren't looked at as academic. It felt like all of those things was an act took a lot of courage to do. But then the moment I was on the stage and singing and using my voice and my body, I just think that live music, and especially live performance of music, I think that's the closest thing you can get to magic, like live magic, and it was at that moment that I was, I had put the films out before I did the live performances for the first time. And, you send the YouTube link out or Vimeo link, and you don't know how the audience is reacting. But that first time that I got up on the stage and performed these songs live, and I'm seeing people in the audience crying, that's powerful. And, especially, and I also say this about Diasporas Now as well, anybody that puts themselves on a stage performing with your body, with your face, and you are visibly othered, it's also like an act of courage and an act of resistance. And you are up there representing, your face, your skin, you're like, how you look. And when you're visibly othered and you choose to put yourself on that stage in the spotlight, I think it's also a powerful act as well. So
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the voice is a powerful instrument. I always tell my students, it's an instrument of empathy. I've studied voice a long time in different capacities, but it wasn't until I started improvising and experimenting with my voice did I really feel and enjoy the sound and the feeling of my voice in my own body. And to kind of be freed from this kind of aesthetic or expectation that, I'm going to go up on stage and be beautiful and wear a gown and, I love opera. I love traditional. I love the sound. I think the operatic voice, traditionally is an incredibly powerful instrument. Technically, it's fascinating to me. But the culture surrounding it, I have some critique, and that's what I push into my work. But that being said, the voice, everyone has a voice, and it's this instrument of empathy. When I hear someone use their voice, I can feel in my body where their voice is resonating. The voice is a map. It tells the story of where we've been, where our family is from. I can hear in someone's voice the history of, what languages their parents spoke to them when they were little. Like you can hear, and I've had clients that have a lot of tongue tension because they've had to flip between languages or trying to hide an accent. Like that becomes a stored trauma in the throat as well. And so the act of using a voice and kind of freeing it and sinking into your resonance and being in this alignment with your voice and taking up that sonic space is so empowering. And I love doing it. I love encouraging others to do that as well, and kind of facilitating and holding space for others to find that voice. It's why I love experimenting, why I love noise music, and why I love extreme vocals, because you know, the amplified voice in itself is this way to kind of create this bigger, to take up even more space. And I love the idea of taking up sonic space. I love the idea that in 1 second during one of my sets, I can be kind of hypnotizing the audience with these operatic sound walls. And then this next second, you know, I hit my distortion pedal and scream and kind of rip through. I feel like I'm ripping through time and space, and everyone's going like this all of a sudden. And kind of those extremes are things I like to play with. And I think I went a little off topic, but the voice is great. It's a wonderful instrument. It's my favorite one.
Great. It was great. Thank you, Micaela. Thank you, Rieko, for your so exhaustive answers. And I would like to ask you, as artists and as women also, how do you elaborate the construction of the colonial thoughts, but also the white, straight, and male predominance in this context and in general? As I know that also in your work you do researches about it, like using a sort of intersectional approach and etc. So I would like to know more about it.
Yeah,
I think, like, just to go off of what Micaela was saying as well, like maybe you felt this, you know, when in your opera life, but having to present in a beautiful gown and be beautiful and contained, and you know, in my music, in my live performances, it took a while to be able to embrace ugliness and like rage and like being able to express that, because we're not, you know, if you're, you know, a woman, like you're not, it's like there's no space to be furious or like, you know, feel the like what you know, like to express more, to take up space with our emotions and our energy. So that's something that I really like to project when I'm performing as well. So, you know, a lot of the times I'm not, you know, I'm not singing beautifully in a way. I'm screaming, you know, I'm growling and screaming and yelling, and the music is, you know, it's not, it's meant to shake you a little bit. And that's also something that was also part of the kind of the myth making in Regenesis as well, because also in No Theater, it's interesting because it's all of the roles, whether they're male or female, are all performed by traditionally by men. And then there's only a limited number of archetypes for the masks, and there's so many different ones for the male mask characters, but for the female characters, there's, you know, like a young girl, an old woman, but the moment the woman becomes an angry woman, she becomes a demon. So she loses her humanity and becomes something else. And then I was like, you know what? You know, maybe being a monster, what if we reclaim this idea of being a monster, being this,
oh, I love it,
you know, and reclaimed it as instead of an ostracization, it's like a way of like embracing this power that comes from being more than a human. So that was kind of my response to that. And I feel like that energy, it's a very punk energy, I guess, but I feel like that's always in the work. That's always, it's just, I don't know, I've always been that way, I think.
Yeah, when I started, you know, making noise music a while ago, I won't give away my age, but you know, it was a predominantly white cis male music scene up in Seattle, and that's kind of why I named the project White Boy Scream. It was a little tongue-in-cheek, a little jab, a little friendly jab, but now, you know, noise music as a genre and as a community, you know, I can speak for like up the West Coast, because that's where I spent the most of my time, West Coast of the United States. It's a lot more diverse now. a lot more queer folks making this music, you know, using this music as this cathartic kind of healing, you know, like chaos, if you will. But when I started, it was like that, and I honestly didn't even, you know, how do I say this? People started telling me like, hey, you know, like I almost didn't realize, because I was so used to just living in this sea of whiteness, that it kind of took other people to start to tell me like, oh, you're different, kind of like being othered, you know, for me to realize, especially, you know, I am mixed. And so I've always grown up, you know, being mixed, half white, half Filipino. I've always been this amorphous, like ambiguous, ethnically ambiguous, at least in my eyes, you know, like, I don't know, I'm growing up with different cultures. And so it was interesting for me to kind of have that placed on me, and then realize, oh yeah, I'm gonna kind of work against this, or play with this space a little bit, challenge this space. And it's interesting to me too when I use my body in performance, because I always want to be careful that I'm also not, how do I put this? I'm not kind of selling myself in a way, or selling my trauma, you know, capitalizing on that, or capitalizing, you know, I want to also, when we're talking about sexuality with the female body, in performance, you know, I don't want to be performing and be in a room performing and using my body in these extreme ways when the audience is predominantly cis white men, you know, which is what it was in the noise scene. So there was always this element, or kind of this fear, like, am I fetishizing myself by just like existing in this space and, you know, wearing like a tank top, like, and like screaming and writhing on the floor, and like, who am I doing this for? And so that was kind of a tension and something that I needed to look into myself, like, okay, if I'm making this work, who am I making it for? Who is actually my audience? And how do I connect with people that are like me? Because, you know, I want to make art with and for, also, like, first and foremost, you know, people in my community. And so that's been a journey, and especially with you know, with Bakunawa and then the film, and then I'm currently in production writing the sequel to Bakunawa. You know, really being careful about who's on my team. Majority of my creative team, actually all of my creative team, you know, are queer Filipino artists, and that's important to me. And it's something that, you know, 10 years ago was not an option. I just, you know, it was not an option for me, because I didn't know we were all out there, but just kind of disconnected from each other in our own little bubbles of being lost in the world, like, and that feels like a really safe place for me, and a safe space. And I think it's important. And some people would argue, like, oh, who are you making, you know, shouldn't your art be accessible for everyone? You know, who's the everyone, right? And to me, you know, the art doesn't have to be for everyone. In fact, there's some people who are so used to everything being for them all the time that I think it's good for them to be like, hey, actually, this space isn't for you. It's for us. And I think that's okay. I think it's healthy. I went a little off topic there, but
it's powerful that your work like was able to bring like a community together as well, when everyone was kind of like, you didn't know where everybody was, and to have everybody come together.
That's literally every time I, you know, meet other Filipino artists, Filipinx artists, they're like, I didn't know you were out there, you know. So, you know, and I think honestly the pandemic, in if there's any silver lining, there's really not, but you know, everyone was online so much, and so we were able to kind of make these connections to far away you know, and there was a lot more visibility that came from, I think, everyone switching to like Zoom. But yeah, that's where I'm at right now. The next opera I'm making, I'm not actually performing in it. I was the center of the film. I played Bakunawa. And I think it's also important when you're a lead artist on projects or making this art to also, you know, I think about my own identity and privileges, and, you know, being mixed, light skinned. I didn't want to center myself for this next opera, which is about another pre-colonial god, Apalaki. I really think that, I really think that apalaki should be performed and embodied and kind of led by, you know, queer, brown, Filipinx bodies, and apalaki, depending on where we take the opera, is going to change. It's going to be different bodies inhabiting this god, and I'm going to be doing the music and kind of music directing, and you know, being in the back a little bit, because yeah, I also think it's important to, what does it mean when we're actually making space for others and using, you know, when we have platforms, we have institutional resource, you know, how do we disseminate power? How do we share resource? How do we actually bring in community in these ways? So that's kind of where I'm at right now with my identity and body. Yeah. I talked for a long time, sorry.
Thank you both. And maybe before going through the last questions, I would ask to the public if there is some question for the two artists, also in Italian, if you want, we can translate it. Okay. Okay. So somebody from the public is asking which is the relationship you have with history of art, and if you have a relationship with the history of art.
Like art, like visual art, or just art in general? Is that up for our interpretation?
Art in general.
Art in,
from the historical point of view.
Okay.
Discipline.
Okay. So it's like art in general from like a historical point of view, like art as a disciplinary concept, like a historical concept. Academic field, as an academic field.
Yeah. Well, I think we both have backgrounds in, we both have backgrounds in classical music. So there's, you know, that training with the classical arts and that background and that discipline instilled for sure. I think currently in my work, I still use the operatic voice a bit. When I'm composing, you know, sometimes I'll quote traditional opera. I play with form. I think it's nice to kind of know the rules before you can break them, type of deal. Just currently where I'm at. But in terms of the institution, I don't like performing in institutional theaters or theatrical spaces or like opera houses. I've had, I really am interested in creating my own space or our own space to produce and perform music. I don't know if that's just my own personality. I hate having a boss, and I hate having to ask permission to use a space. So my relationship with institutional or academic art is kind of like, I'm trying to kind of run away. I mean, I teach in an institution, and so obviously there's a lot of contradictions. It's this thing where I'm constantly trying to escape, but also institutions, at least in the United States, pay the bills. So yeah, there's tension there, and you know, I'm okay living with that tension and playing with it. But ultimately, yeah, I'd love to just have my own space and not have to deal with sound guys.
Guys, I always talk about the sound guys.
I want to be my own sound guy.
I know. That's funny. Yeah, funny question, because I'm literally sitting in the Tate right now. It's called. I didn't even have time to go home after work. My little badge. There we go. So, you know, funny question about a relationship with institutions and art history and all that. I mean, obviously, I have a complicated relationship because I know I agree with this idea of like you have to know the discourse and like the rules before you can break them. I mean, you don't have to, but sometimes it helps. It kind of catches you up to speed, you know, and okay, so this is what's happening. And then you can assess, you know, what's what do you have to say to this conversation to move it in a different direction or in a new direction or provide a fresh perspective. So that's, I work with a lot of institutions, is what it is,
It's difficult. It's difficult because do we, can we critique an institution from within the institution?
And I'm literally sitting in an institution. So but I think it's just like, it's a balancing like the reality of what's come before and the power structures that we exist in, because we can't just exist in a vacuum, we exist within a network of realities. So then we work with what we've got. We've worked with the hand we're given, and try to find ways to like find our twist it a little bit. And that's kind of my approach. That's kind of like my relationship with that, I guess. And with music as well, having that, I'm so grateful to have that classical training, like, being forced to, sorry, mom, but, violin from 4 years old, like, it's kind of like, okay, like, I'm grateful to have that, that discipline and that classical training and an understanding of music theory. But then you learn all those rules, but I think the artists that I admire the most too, you learn the rules up to a certain point and then you break them. So I'm grateful to, have this knowledge and this kind of like, I guess knowledge and experience and understanding of the environment, and then being able to put my own spin to it. That's, I don't know if that's like a non-answer, but.
It's great. So thank you. Any other question? Maybe it's okay. Okay. Maybe the last one is okay. Thank you.
Sorry, do you have to repeat the question? It's not really relating to a film, because I recently made a film after or before doing another performative work. Does it influence their work with performance, the writing of it, and if there is improvisation also?
So
if the film, the work on the film influenced their way to write the performance, and or
vice versa. Okay. So they're asking if the fact that you realized you produced a film, a movie, influenced in some way the way in which you perform your art and etc. And maybe there was another part. It's okay.
Yes, the performance itself and also the writing of it, because they're both write
and
perform, so it's a double.
Okay, as if it also like influence the way you write texts and your performances, of course.
I think after making Bakunawa, the film, I like everything when I'm making performance, I just see it through this cinematic lens. I'm always now it's like I'm corrupted by the film, in a good way, but definitely I would say that's how making the film has influenced my art now. Like I'm making a new opera and it's going to be a live performance, but all the scenes that I'm imagining are through these like very specific like lens shots, and so I'm like, okay, how do I translate my vision of like this cinematic kind of vision into live performance again, So that's where I'm at. It's a bit of a challenge, actually.
That totally resonates with me, because I think, I kind of, when I started making the film, I also, in a past life, I was really into oil painting and stuff like that. So I kind of see film as like painting with footage, and especially because I was using a lot of green screen. I was it felt like painting in a way. And then when I was co-producing so the music from that film is actually, now it's in a very different shape, because I've sat with a team with my sound boys and produced it's going to be very, very different on the EP than it is in the film, because it's kind of a prototype of what's coming. But then in that production stage, I completely see the sound as a kind of like a 3D painting, or like a cinematic. I take a very cinematic approach with the sound as well. So it's kind of like painting in 3D, like cool. Textures and stuff like that. So then when it comes to live performance, it's absolutely a cinematic, because I see it as an extension of world building. So everything's world building for me in a sense of what I'm doing, whether it's my personal work or it's platform community building through Diasporas Now. So then my live performances, I'm very particular about lighting, and a lot of times I'll incorporate smells into it, or that multi-sensory experiences. Sometimes I'll throw have a mound of salt and like writhe around and move the salt around, and adding these elements of ritual that I kind of pull from my research, but then make my own rituals within my performances. It's kind of, I guess it's, I always look at it from the perspective of the audience as experiencing my music and my live performance and my energy as a kind of 3D multisensory cinematic experience. So I think that's my approach to live performance, because again, I see live performance and music as magic. Like I see the stage and the audience and it's kind of this portal to this. It's like live magic being performed. So I take it quite seriously.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think we will stop here this conversation. Unfortunately, time went so fast, but we are like now presenting your two films. So one, the first one of Rieko, which is titled Regeneris, an opera tentacular, and the second one of Micaela, which is titled Bakunawa, Opera of the Seven Moons. So thank you very much both for joining us tonight. It was really interesting to listen to you, to your point of views and your thoughts. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Enjoy the films.
Yay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.